Okay gents, welcome to your first screencast. The idea, as we explained, is that you guys watch this, you soak up the information and use that information to complete your homework, which I'll set via Edmodo when I finish this screencast. Okay, so we're focusing in today's lesson on disability. So there are 4 categories of disability that you guys need to learn and understand. The first category is physical disability, and this is the loss or impairment of one or more limbs. And our examples on the right hand side show you this. So we have some runners who have lower body impairments, and we have a blind runner who obviously has a physical impairment because he has either partial or no sight. Our second is mental disability. Now this is the impairment of intellectual function. Now intellectual function is basically the ability to send and receive messages via the brain. So there's some sort of impairment there, and that would come under the mental disability category. Our third is permanent disability. These are obviously disabilities which are there forever. And our last is temporary disabilities. These are disabilities which only last for a certain amount of time, so the athlete may regain full use of either his mental function or his physical function. And that could be due just to time, or it could be due to treatment. Okay, so sporting adaptations. Now, this is basically changes which are made by the governing bodies or the people in charge of certain sports to ensure that disabled athletes have access to their particular sport. Now, these adaptations, these changes can be made in 2 ways. Some changes are all related to the rules. So, for example, here, picture at the top, we've got some volleyball players, and these guys have to be in a seated position when they play their game. That's part of the rules, so it's a slight change in the game that you guys play within school to allow these athletes to perform that sport. Some adaptations are related to equipment, so they're either rule changes or equipment changes. Again, in our volleyball example, you can see that the net is a lot lower, so that's a rule change, and also the use of some sort of adapted or different type of equipment. A better example of our adapted equipment are the wheelchairs here that allow these fencers to take part in that sporting activity. So every sport, it doesn't really matter, but all sports can be adapted or changed to ensure that disabled athletes have access to them. Now, it's really important within competitions such as the Paralympics that the different disabilities are classified, and that's to ensure that there is level competition and to ensure that nobody has an advantage over anybody else. So there are disability classifications to ensure that athletes are grouped with other athletes of similar abilities. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so the final part of your screencast is some information on the Paralympics, and this is what you guys again need to learn, and you need to be aware that A, we have something called the Paralympics, and B, what it is and how it came about. So the Paralympics is a relatively new name. It used to be called the Parallel Olympics, and it was first held in 1948. Now, those of you who do history, and I'm sure you'll all realise that 1948 is just after the end of the Second World War. So within England and within the world, there were a lot of disabled young men who have returned from war. So to ensure that these guys had an outlet, the Parallel Olympics were designed. So it's now called Paralympics, and they're held every 4 years directly after the Olympics. And hopefully you guys would have watched some Paralympics after the London Olympics. They're organised by the IPC, and the IPC is the International Paralympic Committee, so they have their own governing body who make the decisions related to the sports which are involved in the Paralympics, the classifications that we spoke about earlier, and the groupings of certain disabilities within those sports, and the venues, etc., etc. So you've had some information on the screencast about the 4 categories of disabilities. You've had some information on the changes or adaptations which sports have to ensure that disabled athletes have access to them. And lastly, you've had some information on the Paralympics. Now you can go away and do a lot more detailed research if you'd like to, and that's actually something I want you to do. But what's going to happen now is I'm going to set you some homework on Edmodo. That's going to come back to me with the due date, which will be on Edmodo. It'll be marked, and then in our lesson next week we'll be able to have some practical theory, and hopefully you guys will have learnt lots about disability.